All right, so for this game, we've got pretty much a straight grouping game. We've got a bunch of trees, and we have to essentially assign them to one of three lots. So in terms of the setup, we can set it up exactly as you would expect it to be set up. We can basically have our three lots, let's use a different color. We can have lots numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now the elements themselves happen to be H, L, M, O, and then we have P, S, and W. And we have 7 of them. And essentially this is a one-to-many game, right? Because we are told that every single tree is going to be planted on one of those 3 lots. Exactly one of the 3 lots. Now, in terms of spacing, it's actually worth noting that we're not actually told that every single lot has to have at least one tree. So arguably there is no minimum here, nor is there a maximum given to us at the moment. So we have a bit of flexibility in terms of how things can work. Let's take a look at the rules themselves. So the first rule tells us that the trees planted on one lot are hickory, oak, and exactly one other tree. Now that's actually pretty powerful, both because it gives us a bunch of elements that are together, but also because it gives us the exact spacing for that group. We don't know which lot this is, but one of the lots is basically going to have HO and, most importantly, exactly one other person. So there's going to be one group with exactly 3 people in it. Next, we are told that maple is not planted together with the walnut, so we can say that M and W certainly cannot be together. Next, we are told that either the larch or the walnut, but not both, is planted on lot number 1. So these are always slightly annoying kind of rules, but I guess we can say that either L or W, but we certainly cannot have L and W together there. They will have to go on 1. And we can reserve a space here for one of L or W under this first group. Next, same kind of rule here. So either maple or oak, but not both, are on 2. So we have to have maple or oak, but we certainly cannot have maple and oak on number 2. And we can leave a little placeholder here for maple or oak. Next, we are told that more trees are on lot 3 than are on lot 1. So that's actually pretty powerful. Spacing rules are always, or not always, but they do often tend to be quite powerful. So 3 has to have at least, well, more people than 1. So at the very least, we can say that 3 is definitely going to have at least 2 people there. It could have more, and in fact, it might be worth kind of thinking about how many people each group can have. I mean, 2 is kind of out of the loop here, but for group number 1, arguably speaking, I mean, if we have 1 person here, we'll have to have at least 2 people there, which is very workable. If we have 2 people here, then we'll have to have 3 people in 3, and that adds up to 5, so we can still make it work for group number 2, because we have to have 1 person there. If we have 3 people in number 1, though, you'll notice that's not going to work, because if we have 3 people in number 1, that would mean that we'll have to have 4 people in number 3, and that's already 7, which means we can no longer have one of M or O on the second group, which means that the first group can't possibly have as many as 3 people. The first group is actually limited to, we can say, a maximum of 2 people. So that's pretty good. Now from there, if this is a maximum of 2 people, we can actually now take one more step, because we know that the HO block, with whoever is there, this can't possibly go onto group number 1. So we can say that this block is either going to go into group number 2 or group number 3. And that's actually pretty powerful, because we have 2 major plays with a very significant component. In fact, on top of that, O is one of the people in this group, and that kind of touches on this rule over here, which is one of M or O is in group number 2. So since we have a very restrictive kind of scenario here, what we can actually do is, as usual, exhaust the game from here. So we can say that essentially there's only 2 directions that this game can go right now. Either the HO space block is going to go into position number 2, or it's going to go into position number 3. And then in both of these cases, that's going to be completely blocked off. Nobody else will be able to go into those positions. So from there, we can see what we can do further. Now, we know that in both of these, well, in the first scenario, we still have to have at least 2 people under group number 3. and we still have to have at least one of L or W in group number 1. In terms of the numbers involved, this takes care of how many people here? We now have 1 person, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That actually means that there's only one more person remaining in this scenario, and we can't actually put him over here anymore, because if we were to have 2 people here, we would have to have 3 people here, and we already have 3 people here. That adds up to 8, so that's not actually going to work, which means that in this first scenario, this can't be an extra person. Our last person actually has to go into group number 3. So that's pretty good. That means that this is actually mostly locked down. This will have to be just one of L or W. Actually, we can from here take a step further now, because we know that group number 2 cannot have both M and O, right? It's one of M or O, but not both, which means that if we have an O here, we can no longer have an M here. So we can actually deduce that the M would have to go into group number 3. So this is actually going pretty well. Who do we have left over now? Essentially, we still have to deal with, it looks like P and S. It's actually worth noting that P and S are not actually restricted in any capacity here. They're complete wildcards. And then there's also L or W, right? So one of them is going to obviously go into here, and then the other one is going to bounce somewhere between positions 2 and 3. Next, in the second scenario that we have here, well, we said if H and O are here, well, we know that one of M or O has to go into group number 2, so we can say that this would have to be M since O is already taken. Next, we also know that group number 1 has to have, as usual, at least one person, L or W. Now, since group number 3 already has 3 people, then we could arguably have another person here. Although, wait, if we play the numbers, we said there's a maximum of 2 people in number 1. So even if there was another person here, that really only adds up to 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means that there arguably is a 7th person who can't go into group 3, and he wouldn't be able to go into group 1. So that means that that last person is actually going to have to go into group number 2. Let's just run that again. Group number 1 could have a 2nd person, but there's no way for group number 1 to have a 3rd person, right? So even if group number 1 had 2 people in it, and then we have 3 people here, that still leaves us with 2 extra people, and I guess they're going to have to go into group number 2. Now, of course, this guy doesn't have to have a 2nd person. You actually could have just one person here, and then the last person, we would have another 3rd in number 2. So we have a little bit of flexibility here, but at the very minimum, there actually does have to be at least a 2nd person in group number 2 here. Next, is there anything else we can do here? Well, I guess we do have that one rule, that one of M or W, sorry, not one of M or W, M and W can never be together, which means that in both of these scenarios, we can actually kind of make a minor note that in the first scenario, W can't go into group 3. In the second scenario, W certainly could not go into group 2. Now remember, this is an exhaustive set, right? So this is not just a bunch of random possibilities. These are kind of complete possibilities. Everything that could happen in this game is now going to have to fit into one or the other scenarios. In fact, we can just label these scenarios A and B. So from here, we can actually look at the questions themselves. Now, the first question, as usual, is our exclusion question. So as usual, we're going to do this by the rules. So the first rule told us that one of the groups has to have HO plus one other person. So let's take a look. Answer choice A has just H and O in lot number 2, so we can easily disqualify that one. Answer choice B has HO with one other person, so that's fine. C has HO and another person, so that's fine. D has HO plus 1, that's fine. And E has HO plus 1, we're still good. So we've knocked off answer choice A. Next, the second rule was that M and W certainly cannot be together. So we've knocked off A already. So looking at answer choice B, M and W are not together. C, M and W are not together. D, they are not together. And E, they are not together either. So this actually looks pretty good. Next, we're told that one of L or W, but not both, has to go into group 1. So for answer choice B, we're still okay. Answer choice C, we have an M in lot number 1, but there's no L or W there, so we can disqualify answer choice C pretty comfortably. Next, answer choice D has a W without an L, so we're good, and answer choice E has a W without an L, so we're good. Next, one of M or O has to go into group 2, but not both. So answer choice B has an O without an M, so we're good. Answer choice C is already out. D has M without O, so we're good. And E has neither M nor O, so we can cross off answer choice E from the answers. And lastly, 3 has to have more people than 1, and we're just down to answer choices B and D now. So answer choice B has 2 people in 1 and 2 people in 3, so that certainly does not work, leaving us with D as the only viable answer choice for question number 7. Next, from there we can go into the local questions. So the first local question that we're given here is number 8, which says, if H happens to be on lot number 2. Well, the thing is, looking at our exhaustions, if H is on lot number 2, that pretty much simply locks us into scenario A, where H is on lot number 2, and then everything else, there's really nothing more to figure out. We've done as much damage as we could have initially. So I guess the question now simply becomes, what must be on lot number 3? Well, we figured that out already. M would then have to go on lot number 3. Best answer choice to question number 8 then becomes answer B. Next. Answer choice, question number 9 rather, is a global question. So we're going to come back to that one in just a moment. Let's take a look at question number 10. So number 10 says, if walnut is on lot number 3. Well, the thing is, if the walnut is on lot number 3, right away, that means that we cannot be working in this scenario A because walnut cannot go there. So we're kind of locked into scenario B. And we can kind of play this out below. So we can say that if we have to have walnut on number 3, it has to be the second scenario, so H and O are going to join, and this is going to lock down. And then we know a bunch of other stuff. We're going to have M plus another person there, and as usual, we have to have one of L or W in lot number 1. Now, anything else we can do here? Well, we still have to deal with P and S, arguably, and otherwise, it doesn't look like much. I mean, one of L or W is going to go somewhere, but that seems pretty... Oh, wait a minute. There it is. We know that W is already on lot number 3, so this can't be L or W. It really just has to be W. Sorry, L rather. So we can lock down... Let's make this a little bigger. We can say that L is definitely going to be in lot number 1. I guess from there, let's see what we can do. The question itself asks, which of the following could be true? Answer choice A says, sycamore is on number 1. Well, arguably, sycamore is a pretty open floating element, and there's certainly room for one more person here, so we could have sycamore potentially on number 1. That actually seems functional. Answer choice B, hickory is on 2. Well, no, that definitely can't happen because H is already on 3. Next, larch is on 2. Nope, larch is on 1. Next, plum is on 3. Well, no, because we know that 3 is already full. W, H, and O are the 3 because we said HO plus only one other person. So this can't be plum because that's already filled up. Next, can we have sycamore on 3? Same kind of problem. We know that there's no more room on 3 to fit sycamore. In fact, for this question, you actually could have disqualified, if you weren't sure, you could have disqualified answer choices D and E just by virtue of the fact that P and S are effectively identical elements. They're completely free-floating elements that have no rules, which means if answer choice D could have been possible, if plum could have gone on 3, then there would have been no reason that sycamore couldn't equally go on 3. The fact that answer choices D and E are logically identical answers effectively disqualifies them both. So either way, that leaves us with answer choice A as the only viable answer for question number 10. Next. Question number 11 is global. We'll come back to that one in a second. Let's finish off question number 9. So number 9 says, which of the following is a complete and accurate list of the trees, any of which could go on number 1? Well, where do we start? We definitely know that to start, as we said early on, H and O certainly could never go on 1. So we can cross off any answer choice that has either an H or an O in it because we know that those guys certainly could never go on the first lot. So that gets rid of answer choices A and B, both of which have an H. Next, in this last scenario, we've confirmed that L definitely could have gone on 1, so we can cross off any answer choice that does not have an L, so that easily disqualifies answer choice E. For the record, I didn't do the same thing with the walnut because even though we do say one of L or W has to go on number 1, we haven't actually quite seen a scenario where W went there. It still remains technically possible, even though there doesn't seem to be any reason for that. But it still is technically possible that for some reason, maybe W couldn't have gone on 1. Anyways, that leaves us with answer choices C and D at this point. Now, between C and D, when you're down to 2, you really just want to look at the kind of the odd one out. And the only difference between C and D is the sycamore. So the question really becomes, could the sycamore go on lot number 1? Well, the thing is, in the previous question, we actually did say for question number 10, the right answer choice was that the sycamore could have gone on number 1. So that already would have proven that the sycamore could go on lot number 1. But it's also worth noting that in both answer choices C and D, we seem to already accept that the plum could have gone on both or on lot number 1. And we said just a moment ago, the plum and the sycamore are identical. If it's possible for P to go on number 1, then it should certainly be possible for S to also go on number 1, which means either way you look at it, the sycamore certainly could go on lot number 1, which makes the answer to question number 1 answer choice C. Next, lastly, question number 11. Where each of the trees is planted is completely determined if which of the following is planted onto lot number 2. So the question is, what would lock the game if it went onto lot number 2? Well, we can take a slight shortcut here because the thing is, in our exhaustive sets, we've actually seen cases where H and O were on lot number 2, but they certainly didn't lock down the game. And in this scenario, M went on number 2, and it certainly did not lock down the game. Now, it's possible that we maybe missed something when we were exhausting this, but it seems pretty safe that H, O, and M certainly would not lock down the game if they're on 2, because we went through the legwork, and it certainly didn't seem like those ones would have locked the game. So we can get rid of answer choice. Looks like D, the maple, is the only one that allows us to get rid of. So onwards, we're down to answer choices A, B, C, and E. Actually, we can take a bit of a shortcut here because for the same reason as we mentioned a few moments ago, the sycamore and the plum, answer choices B and C. It's worth noting, again, these guys are logically identical elements, which means it's impossible for either one of them to be the answer because if the sycamore would lock down the game on number 2, then shouldn't the plum also equally lock down the game on number 2? Right? There's no logical distinction between P and S, which means they can't both be the right answer choice, so we can get rid of both answer choices B and C. They can't both be right, so they both must be wrong. Lastly, we're just down to answer choices A and E, so let's just go in order. Answer choice A gives us the walnut. Could or would the W on 2 lock down the game? Well, first of all, we do know that if W goes on 2, that's not going to be in scenario B, so that locks us into scenario A. In fact, it's the last question, so let's dirty this up. We can say that if the W goes on number 2, it has to be on scenario A because it certainly could not go over here in scenario B. But then that would lock down the second lot. But then, wait a minute, if W happens to be on 2, then we actually do know that it would be the L that happens to go on 1 because that had to be either L or W. And there's only one person here, which means if there's only one person here, then that locks lot number 1, lot number 2 is locked, which means everybody else is going to have to go into 3, which includes just both P and S, which means if W is on 2, does that lock down the game? Absolutely. The best answer to question number 11 then becomes answer choice A. For the record, for answer choice E, if the larch was to go on lot number 2, the reason that wouldn't similarly lock down the game is that the larch could go on lot number 2 in scenario B as well. We could have actually put L here, or it would have worked in scenario A also, which means putting the larch on lot number 2 would be consistent with both A and B, so it would not completely lock everything down. So the best answer choice here, once again, is answer choice A.